Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome the president of the Maricopa County Branch NAACP, Dr. Karen Harden.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are grateful that you are here with us tonight. On behalf of the Maricopa County Branch NAACP, welcome. Welcome to our inaugural conversation entitled The Circle to the Cypher. The Circle to the Cypher is a term that was created by Dr. Westenberg, who is the political action chair for our branch of the NAACP. It's important for me to let you know that there are 8 different branches of the NAACP throughout the state of Arizona. We represent the Maricopa County Branch. Tonight's community conversation will highlight one of the 6 NAACP game changers. That game changer is public safety and criminal justice. Founded in 1909, the NAACP is the nation's oldest and largest nonpartisan social justice organization. There are over 2,200 branches throughout the country and internationally. Our members are the premier advocates for civil rights in communities across this country. As we move closer to the general election, our community is in the midst of having a variety of decisions, including selecting who will be the next Maricopa County Attorney. When it comes to public safety and criminal justice system, the county attorneys are one of the most powerful players in this arena. Their job is to represent the people. They are to represent the people in criminal court by enforcing the law and prosecuting those who commit crimes. Their choices impact major social issues. Those social issues include economic justice, public health, immigrants' rights, and racial disparities. That's why it is so important for the branch to invite both Maricopa County Attorney candidates. Alistair Adele was invited to join us tonight, but she had a schedule conflict. But we are delighted that Julie Gunnigle is here with us today to join our community conversation. Judy Gunnigle is here to see, we're here to see where she stands on important issues of the criminal justice system in Maricopa County. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Julie Gunnigle for taking time to be with us, who was also joined us back in February when we had another event called Countdown 2020. So thank you, Julie, for joining us again. And she also is a member of the Maricopa County Branch NAACP. Thank you, Political Action Committee members, Dr. Westenberg, Patrick Brown, and Kanisha Jackson for organizing this event for this evening. Now, at this time, I have the pleasure of introducing a talented community member. He's hailing from the desert of the city of Phoenix by way of sunny California. It is the tenacious Rocky Tyree. Rocky Tyree is quickly becoming the de facto underdog, rising independent MC. Rocky has developed the reputation of a standout artist with breakout potential. His social commentary, engaging visual content, and outstanding productions make him a powerhouse contender for this current generation. And he is in constant comparisons to living legends such as Black Thought of the Roots and Royce 59, only serve to cement these traits as merits. That stands for Rocky Tyree. Our goal with these conversations is to reach out to all citizens. We need to encourage everyone to exercise their right to vote. We are here to encourage you to vote as though your life depends on it. I am delighted to introduce you to Rocky Tyree, who will serve as tonight's MC.
Thank you, Dr. Harden, for that warm welcome. I'm extremely proud to serve as the MC of this very special community event on public safety and the criminal justice system. As we center ourselves on the general election, it's important for us to be informed about the candidates running for positions that directly impact the Black and brown communities. Events like this help us stay informed, get out the vote, and allow us to ask candidates the difficult questions. During this discussion, attendees will be able to enter questions in the chat section where selected questions will be presented during the audience Q&A session. So thank you to all the guests for taking the time to attend tonight's event on a topic that impacts the daily lives of so many of us across the country, including right here in Arizona. And now it is my pleasure to introduce a woman who is quickly making a name for herself. She is a community connector and active writer with a passion for economic justice, a philanthropist with the African American Women's Giving and Empowerment Circle through the Arizona Community Foundation, and most recently, she was elected to serve as the vice president of the Phoenix Urban League Young Professionals. So please welcome Caitlin Harris-Lang, who will serve as tonight's moderator.
Thank you, Rocky. I'm honored to serve as tonight's moderator. We'll discuss issues related to public safety and the criminal justice system with Maricopa County Attorney candidate, Julie Gunnigle. What better time than now with everything going on here in Arizona and across the country to discuss our concerns with who might be the next Maricopa County Attorney. As County Attorney, she will have the authority to make decisions that directly impact policies, litigation, and laws right here in Maricopa County, which is the fourth most populous county in the country. Please welcome Julie Gunnigle, candidate for Maricopa County Attorney. Hi, Julie. Thank you for agreeing to participate in tonight's From the Circle to the Cypher event. We're happy to have you in attendance, and we'll start the discussion on some key topics related to public safety and the criminal justice system that impacts the greater Phoenix community. We'll end with some questions from the virtual audience. A member from the Maricopa County Branch NAACP will be monitoring questions as they come in. So those of you watching, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat as they come to you. Okay, let's get started. Julie, I'd love if you'd take 2 or 3 minutes to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and describe briefly what's under the scope of the county attorney.
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, first of all, Caitlin, Rocky, Dr. Harden, thank you so much for such a warm introduction. I am so grateful to be with you this evening. So, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as you rightly say, is the county attorney, the chief prosecutor for the 4th largest county in the country. And it is a position with a past. This is the position that was held by people like Andrew Thomas, who used this position for all of the wrong reasons and ended up disbarred. This was the position that was held by Bill Montgomery, and who later assumed a position on the Supreme Court. And it's currently held by an unelected county attorney. But this is one of the most powerful positions if you believe in justice, and justice is my highest value. So I'm Julie Gunnigle. I was born and raised right here in Arizona, got a degree in chemistry from Northern Arizona University and a law degree from the University of Notre Dame. I served the Indiana community as a prosecutor, where I primarily worked on domestic violence and child-on-child sexual assault cases. From there, I was tapped to join the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, where I worked on financial crime and public corruption, and had experience directly holding our politicians accountable when they were stealing public funds. And when I moved back to Arizona, I was so disappointed, because I saw what had happened to our state. I saw politicians just openly voting money into their own pocket. I saw what had become of our public health system, our school system as a result of these unchecked conflicts of interest. And I think most importantly, I saw what had happened with the growth of our private prisons. We are the 5th largest incarcerator in our entire country and the 8th largest incarcerator in our entire world. And we allow those we elect to vote on legislation that raises mandatory minimums, that makes it harder for folks to re-enter society, that takes away rehabilitation programs. We allow them to vote on that legislation and then take money from the private prison industry to fund their campaigns. I think that's wrong. And I think if there's one issue that we can get at in November, it's bringing real transparency and clarity and good government back to Arizona. And I view this position as just so key. So if you believe in economic justice, if you believe that we should be investing in public health, if you believe that we should be treating immigrants as humans and as people and with people with dignity, and if you believe that we can really make progress on some of the decades-long racial disparities that we've seen in policing, I sure think that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office should be an office that you're paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you. You mentioned, moving up the standard of what criminal prosecutions and public safety is in Arizona. Let's start by talking about public safety. I think previously to where we are now, elected officials usually talk about public safety as top priority in their campaign platform, and they don't need to go into what it really means to them. And now we're hearing a lot, the protests here and across the country, people are saying they don't feel safe. People are saying they feel targeted. And there's data that came out by the ACLU of Arizona that specifically looks at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and highlighted some things in their report about Hispanic defendants are ordered to pay higher fines than whites. Black and Hispanic people are spending more time incarcerated than white people for the same crime. So let's start with programs and policies to address some of those things. What would you implement as county attorney? What would be some of your first priorities to increase public safety for all people, including Black and brown people in this community?
Sure. Well, I think the starting point should be that folks who don't feel safe because of our criminal justice system, folks who are protesting police violence, they're right. The ACLU report and the report that was released just last week from the Phoenix Police Department shows that they're right. The criminal justice system unfairly targets Black and brown bodies, and it's well past time we addressed that. So from the point of view of our county attorney's office, there's quite a bit that can be done. And those jurisdictions that have most effectively addressed racial disparities have done it more or less the same way. And it's just being radical with transparency. It's releasing all of the data in a disaggregated form with, obviously without names, but making public who is being charged for what sort of crime, what their race is, what offers they're being given in terms of pleas, and what their eventual sentences are. And then once that data is made public and is available, really doing a deep dive into what it means. So let me give you a few examples because there have been people who have tackled this better than others. So for example, in Minneapolis, one of the things that the prosecutor's office looked at is why is it that Black folks are given higher sentences for drug crimes? What they found was surprising. They found, obviously they were being charged more and there were big disparities in policing, but more than that, the prosecutors were almost always stacking charges of paraphernalia right alongside those drug charges in instances where they weren't doing that for white folks. That's not fair. And from there, they were able to make an intelligent policy choice that changed the system. Because as we're looking at these deep disparities, and as we're contemplating how to best address systemic racism in our system, I don't think it's good enough that we just change the people. We need to break those systems, and that is one way to do it. Incidentally, that same group found that there were big differences in what kinds of crimes were pursued on behalf of which survivors. So they also were able to find things like that when Black folks reported crimes against them, particularly violent crimes, that those crimes weren't charged as often as when the alleged victim or survivor was white. And that's equally wrong. So radical data transparency, I think, is a really good step, and it would be a truly bold reform from this office, an office that historically has been opaque, an office that historically has taken over 200 days to even respond to public records requests. That is step one of a long community involved process to break the systems down and to provide real justice and equal justice under the law.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Talking about use of force, since George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, we've seen fatal use of force here in Maricopa County, a number of instances. Talk to us about how you'd handle fatal uses of force involving local police, and maybe give us a little bit of background on the relationship between law enforcement and the county attorney's office.
Sure. Okay. So I think actually the relationship, that's such a good question, Caitlin. Like the relationship is the place to start, because your prosecutors day in and day out, for better or for worse, rely on police to prove up their cases every single day in court. And what that tends to lead to are close relationships between police and prosecutors. In some offices I've been in, they've been just not even just close relationships. They've ended up in marriages. They work hand in hand, side by side so frequently. So when we talk about good governance, when we talk about eliminating conflicts of interest, that is a conflict of interest that has to go. Because we cannot expect prosecutors to, rely on officers day in and day out and then turn around and hold folks accountable when they break the law and when they use force in inappropriate ways. So to fix this issue, what we truly need is independence. So I am committed to an independent and community involved, that means all of us, that means oversight, unit to prosecute police use of force cases. It's something that does not currently exist now and absolutely should have been a first step for any county attorney stepping into this office, who has to have the deep recognition that Phoenix was #1 in the country in 2019 when it came to officer involved shootings. And what's, I think, even worse than the inability to address those issues through the prosecutor's office and truly hold folks accountable is the fact that our different departments have had this data and have had this information for years about who is targeted as a result of that state violence. And it's disproportionately Black and brown folks, and that needs to change. We need to be looking inward at this system and how it could change if we were willing to reevaluate the processes that we use and I think change the leadership, because that is also so key.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Talking more about use of force, the violations, and some of the other kind of erosion of trust issues that we've talked about really breaks apart the relationship between the community and the justice system as a whole. Talking about our immigrant community, they're a huge part of our culture here in Arizona, our society. As county attorney, how would you work to develop a trusting relationship with the immigrant community in the county?
So first steps, the immigrant community is right not to trust the Maricopa County Attorney's office. For years, this office has intentionally separated families. It has driven deep divisions into our community, and it has perpetrated in terror amongst so many of those in our community. That's the part that really I think needs to change as a matter of culture. And I was so deeply ashamed to watch the county attorney's office be the only office in our entire state to voice its support of that SB 1070 copycat legislation that happened last legislative session. That was wrong. So here's what we could do if we got a reform-minded county attorney who believes in the dignity that all people should be afforded. First, in all places, at all times, whether public-facing or private-facing, this office should advocate for the repeal of SB 1070. It is a deeply unjust law that divides our community and has got to go. Second, this office should stop charging people intentionally to affect their immigration status. one of the things that we've seen out of this office, because we know that criminal charges tend to be used in this instance to affect immigration status, to make someone quote unquote deportable. And for years, this office has bumped up charges against immigrants, knowing that there will be immigration consequences. That's wrong. So one of the things I've proposed is a immigration neutral plea policy wherein our prosecutors should never be asking for plea consequences, knowing that there'll be immigration statuses, and should aim to make any sort of pleas offered as immigration neutral as possible. Last, we need to rebuild trust, and there cannot be trust until there is a truly safe space for immigrants to accurately report crime and exploitation without fear of ICE being called. And I believe that our county attorney's office should be a safe space and should provide alternative reporting mechanisms so that those who are victimized and exploited have a place to go to report crime, because right now there is no trust, and there cannot be any trust until we get a regime change and a system change over at the county attorney's office.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to go back to your answer on the previous question, because there's a question that came in from a viewer, Brielle Reish, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. You talked about getting the community involved and providing some of that oversight and accountability. She asked, what does community involved mean to you? How will you choose who's a part of your community oversight boards?
Absolutely. So there should be a clear application process, and that allows, everybody in the community to apply. It should not be what it is right now, which is when it comes to police accountability and the conviction integrity unit, for example, it's 3 hand-picked players from our current county attorney. Sorry, but 3 people can't in any sense adequately protect the diversity of people and viewpoints that are here in Maricopa County. So in my view, that's something that the NAACP should be involved in. That's something that our different community members and groups should be involved in, and that we should truly have a board that is in an advisory fashion that advises this office. But when it comes to the independent unit for police use of force, have actual oversight so that they can report back to their community, hey, this is how this is being handled out of this office, and to do so with transparency, because right now, these are all in a very opaque box where we don't know how long decisions take. We don't know why prosecutors have determined the things that they have with respect to police use of force cases. Antonio Arce's case was a disgusting example of this. This office sat on it for nearly a year, did not communicate with family members what was happening in the case, and at the end of the day, didn't let anybody know why those police officers were not charged. And when I think of community involvement, I think of accuracy, accountability, and transparency. And that can only happen when we have an actual community board that represents the community this office is supposed to serve.
Mm-hmm. I think I got an email last week from the county attorney's office asking for community nominations or applications for a board. Kind of regarding this thing, but I looked at it, I was like, you need to have a law degree, and you needed to already kind of be in the criminal justice system. Are those requirements, are those accurate, or will community be more like everyday people, or will they need to be part of the judicial system already?
Well, first of all, you read that email right, and that's what I'm talking about with the Conviction Integrity Board. Ooh, I'm sorry. I think you can hear thunder. I'm sitting next to a window. Yeah. And you're right. The Conviction Integrity Board that was put together by this office already calls on people who have experience in the criminal justice world. And I also think that's wrong. If you want to build community trust, you don't go to folks who are already involved in the system. You go to the community and you try to get as big a cross section as you possibly can of people who, especially folks who are directly impacted by the system, and include them in the conversation. That's how it's supposed to work. And I was disappointed to see, in particular, the Conviction Integrity Unit not working in that way. I will also note that the head of the Conviction Integrity Unit right now is Rachel Mitchell, someone whose name is not synonymous with integrity, she being the person who went before the Supreme Court during Kavanaugh's nomination process and defended the indefensible. And I think that's wrong, and that's telling of the leadership in this office.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's move. I know you mentioned you had a history kind of working in juvenile law. Let's talk about kind of sentencing juveniles as adults. Tell us a little bit about kind of your philosophy around that, and how you would approach those cases as county attorney.
Sure. So we know more than ever about what the developing brain looks like. And we know that our children are still developing executive functioning up to the age of 25. And because we know this, it should always be the position of your county attorney's office that children should be treated as children and should remain in the juvenile justice system. That hasn't been the case always in the past. Also think that this office should be fighting for reforms that make sense based on the best evidence. And I think this office should be a voice down at the Capitol for things like raise the age legislation. What a raise the age legislation does is it makes it possible for kids who would otherwise be presumptively into the adult system to remain in the juvenile system. Now, the juvenile system, let's talk about that for a second, because that's not perfect either. But the goal of the juvenile justice system is rehabilitation. So when we think about what needs to happen on that side, what services we need to provide, how we need to be protecting families with the aim to keep people together and keep families together, we should be focusing on, on rehabilitation and on addressing harms done to the community, but not perpetrating more. And I think that's one of the instances that really happens in our juvenile justice system. And I say that as someone who for over a year of her life spent nearly every single weekend inside our 2 juvenile detention centers teaching those kids. I firmly believe that the best minds of our generation are sitting in a juvenile detention center, and they're not sitting there for reasons that do our community any good. They're sitting there because they haven't had access to the basics. They haven't had access, oftentimes to food security, to housing security. They haven't had access to programs that would help them. They've been funneled into a system that inevitably leads into prison, and prison for a lifetime. I also think that intimately ties in with our underfunded education system, because we know that kids in our criminal justice system are disproportionately from underfunded schools. And there are specific things that we can do. It should be shocking to all of us that, for example, half of our adults inside our jails and prisons have dyslexia. And if we were to adequately address in our schools the very simple act of addressing what is a learning disability and making sure that all folks can read, because that becomes a true risk of a future involvement in the criminal justice system, I can't help but to think we could build a better Arizona. So it seems to me that all of these issues and how we treat our population here in Arizona and how we've defunded so many of our programs, it's all tied together in what is very fairly called a school to prison pipeline and a foster care to prison pipeline.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier that we're the 5th largest incarcerator in the world, or in the US, and the 8th largest in the world, like thinking about all of the money that's being spent on that and not in some of these other programs. Talking about first-time offenders ages 18 to 25, do you support diversion and mentor programs for that group? And kind of what is the role of the county attorney? What would your role be in promoting those programs?
Absolutely. So our county attorney is uniquely empowered with prosecutorial discretion, and that discretion can mean a whole host of things. It can mean not charging people. When we talk about youth 18 to 25, we should not be permanently tagging someone with the collateral consequences of a conviction. We need to be so careful as prosecutors that we are doing justice and not destroying lives. So when I think about these low level and characterized as nonviolent offenses, I think we really need to take a hard look to whether or not we should be prosecuting them at all. And that's one of the things that our prosecutor's office can do. When it comes to the most common charges in particular, I want to see that people who are experiencing substance use disorder do not end up in our prisons, that they end up in treatment programs and have that option given to them at little to no cost and early in the system. We know that about 2/3 of the cases that run through the Maricopa County Attorney's Office are drug related. And if we were to be intelligent with our use of resources, if we were to be compassionate and know what the cycle of addiction looks like and how we can interrupt that process with intelligent reforms, we could be so much more humane, we could save taxpayers so much money, and we could do the right thing. And other jurisdictions have, and I see that in the, I see that in the chat box too, with how non-emergency calls are filtered. That's absolutely something that this office can be a bully pulpit to help enact.
Mm-hmm. I'll read it out just in case anybody doesn't see it. How do you feel about community programs that filter non-emergency calls away from the police and send experienced crisis workers instead? They mentioned a program for that in Oregon and in Denver. And do you think the county could benefit from that program?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The county could benefit from those sorts of programs. And that's something that I would be a big proponent of. Obviously, it's not something that is solely within the discretion of the county attorney's office. Those are partnerships that are built with city and state agencies. But I think it's really important to acknowledge, what it would mean to have experienced crisis workers working in lieu of police in a lot of these instances. We are experiencing right now a epidemic of both, COVID-19, but of suicidal ideation. And I know that these hotlines are getting more and more calls because of the stress related to COVID and because of the despair that folks are feeling right now and because of joblessness and impending homelessness. And it's really scary. And I know that myself personally was put in a situation just a few weeks ago where I wanted to be able to make a wellness check call. And I was so scared knowing what it might be like for the person to have police respond instead of an experienced crisis worker. And I can't help but to think that those sorts of instances are just so common, especially right now. And that we need people who have that sort of expertise to be responding to wellness check calls and to crisis calls writ large. That is something that we could and should be doing here in Maricopa County.
Earlier, you mentioned prosecutorial discretion. I believe plea bargains factor into that, and this is just my layman kind of interpretation of plea bargains, is that they can help boost conviction rates for the office, but they also can trap people who may not be guilty of anything into accepting that plea, and then if they get stopped again or have something happen in the past, it will show up on their record. Is that right?
Accurate, 100%.
Tell us a little bit about your philosophy around plea bargains, what you would hope to implement as county attorney in regards to that.
Sure. Let me first tell you why plea bargaining in Arizona is so particularly harsh. I think it's probably the best point, because we tend to think of the criminal justice system as a judge on top and, a defense attorney and a prosecutor, hopefully working towards justice and a resolution, somewhere below that, right? And that the judge ultimately gets to make the decision as to sentences, as to guilt, et cetera. But in Arizona, that's really not how it works. And one of the reasons why that's not how it works is because we've put in such harsh mandatory minimum sentences, which means that the decision as to whether or not someone will end up in prison and for how long largely falls into the prosecutor's decision-making. And it happens really early in the system. It happens right at charging, where it's almost a foregone conclusion what will happen to a person once the prosecutor has charged them with a crime associated with a mandatory minimum sentence. So when we talk about plea bargaining, I think the other thing that we need to discuss is how it ties into bail reform. because in our county, we have so many folks who are behind bars for no other reason than they can't afford their bail. And it has been a longstanding practice to ask for bail and bond, sometimes unaffordable bail and bond, that keeps people behind bars. But the other thing it does is it forces a plea agreement. And I think that's wrong. It's one of the reasons why in our county, we only go to trial on about 1% of our cases. It's because we keep folks in jail with bail and bond, and that's something that we can stop asking for, by the way. And it's one of my commitments that we stop asking for cash bail. And that for folks who are truly either a danger to the community or present a risk of flight, we take that to a judge and we ask for detention orders. So we can fix the system by stop doing that. We can fix the system by making intelligent charging decisions, and in some cases not charging cases at all. And I'm particularly thinking of our low-level and designated nonviolent offenses, where we can either divert those folks or deflect them into different programs. And then the other thing that we can do is we can stop stacking sentences. One of the things this office has been known for is a practice called Hannah Priors. It's this idea that if someone has multiple different felony counts, even though they don't have a prior conviction, they can be charged as a repeat offender on the very first case. And it's one of the reasons why we're the 8th largest incarcerator in the country. We've got high mandatory minimums, we stack charges, and then, oh, by the way, we have truth in sentencing laws as well, which means that folks have to do a full 85% of their time sentenced without really opportunity for early release in the vast majority of cases, and with no rehabilitation or real incentive to engage in rehabilitation programs while they're in prison. So that's how the system is stacked against people, and that's really what we can change with intelligent charging policies, like stop charging Hannah Priors, dismiss marijuana charges altogether, because that is no longer, in my view, a valid use of prosecutorial authority, and stop prosecuting poverty writ large.
Mm-hmm. So with the truth in sentencing laws and mandatory minimums, are those things that the county attorney can stop following, or are those also things that we need the legislature to change? So what is the process of changing those things look like?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. Okay, so for truth in sentencing, I think we have to acknowledge what a very sad day today is. Because today the Second Chances Act got thrown off the ballot. And I'm sad, but my tears don't matter at all compared to the folks behind bars and the family members who have been working so hard to get this measure on the ballot. Because what this would have done is help remediate these incredibly long sentences and would allow for resentencing in the interest of justice for so many people that are behind bars for outrageous amounts of time. So I was deeply troubled and saddened. I think what we need to do going forward is address that legislatively, because that's not something your county attorney can change. That's something that's built into statute and that needs to change either via citizen referendum or legislation. With respect to mandatory minimums, there are some things that your county attorney can do, especially with respect to charging, because when she knows that there is a unjust mandatory minimum associated with a particular charge, we really need to be thinking carefully, should we be charging altogether? And if it is something that's worthy of a charge, but not worthy of the sentence that the legislature has imposed, and in particular, I'm thinking of the mandatory minimums that go along with a lot of our drug crimes, is there a different way to charge it that avoids the harsh consequences of a mandatory minimum? And in a lot of ways, there are clever ways that a prosecuting attorney can address those concerns to take away the sting of a harsh mandatory minimum and do real justice.
Mm-hmm. Also, kind of along that line of, setting people up for success when they're released. I think last year there was a Senate bill 1437 that was seeking to remove the inquiry of a previous conviction on job applications. It didn't get a hearing, didn't move forward. Do you think it's also referred to like banning the box? Do you think there's a chance in this current political climate, or maybe after the election in November, that we could pass something like that in Arizona?
I sure hope so, because the collateral consequences of conviction are extreme, and they truly do present big barriers to being able to have the second chance that so many people deserve. You know, it's interesting though, and while I support the intentions of stuff like ban the box, I think that that's a powerful statement. I would note that there have been jurisdictions that have banned the box. And one of the things that they found is that Black and brown folks continue to be discriminated against, because what employers presume, if they can't ask the question, they still have big employment biases, and that's wrong. So it seems to me that what might even be a better solution than ban the box is expungements. Arizona doesn't do expungements. It doesn't give people that real opportunity. And they're actually, in the vast majority of cases, there's one nuanced area where it does. But the vast majority of people who have a conviction can't get it expunged here in Arizona. The best they can do is something called a set aside. And that doesn't undo the harm. That doesn't, clear their record. So I would be a fan of implementing real expungements going forward, because it seems to me that even better than banning the box, not having to check that box at all would be a powerful statement.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I do want to touch on qualified immunity before we go to some audience questions. It's getting a lot of attention, very complicated for me to understand, but again, my layman interpretation is it makes it very hard to hold police or government officials accountable for violating the civil rights of people, and there needs to be this clearly established precedent with a very similar, identical details of the incident already kind of been found, somebody was found guilty of that in the same kind of geographic location. I know there are some states like Colorado where the governor kind of maneuvered a workaround for people around that. Kind of what is the role of the county attorney with qualified immunity? Is there something that can be done to increase that accountability of holding individual actors accountable when they do violate our rights?
Sure. And that was beautifully stated. I have lost.
Feel free to give a better description. I know I was like putting it all together, but go ahead.
No, that was spot on. The only thing I would mention is that qualified immunity is this legal fiction that our federal courts came up with. So it's a federal invention, and because it's a federal invention, the response to it, if we're going to truly undo qualified immunity, like at its source, should be federal legislation. And I'd be supportive of that, absolutely. And I'd be supportive of state efforts to undo it as well. And that would be able to provide relief on the civil side, which would be, monetary damages to undo the harm that the police had done in those cases. This office isn't so much that, it is more an opportunity to hold folks criminally accountable for their conduct as well. So for example, use of force callouts that come through this office. We had over a 2-year period, hundreds of use of force callouts that happened. And over that, actually it was a 5-year period, we only saw one officer charged with a criminal offense. And that was for the murder of Daniel Cypher. And at the end of the day, there was no conviction that was obtained. So I am a believer in accountability, but the accountability the county attorney can give you is accountability on the criminal side, which is also hugely important and harkens back to our conversation of how we get there and why we need an independent unit to address police use of force.
Thank you. I'd love to take some questions from viewers. Rocky, let's take the first question.
Sure. It looks like some of our questions were actually put into the discussion we had earlier, but we had one that did go without being answered at this point or referenced, and that is from Sydney Roach. And she asks, a huge part of the current disparity and injustice is the lack of accountability within political platforms. Julie, how would you assure accountability and create a priority of anti-racism within our justice system and with AZ politicians?
Oh, that is the question. Let me talk first about what we can do in our justice system, because the only way we can hold people accountable within our justice system is if there's transparency, right? You need to first know what's happening in that system. So that is my number one commitment, is that when elected, what you will know is what's happening, who we're charging for what crimes, and you'll be able to see that without a FOIA request, without waiting, happening openly on the website, and have access to that data for public consumption. Equally so, having that citizen advisory board and community involvement when it comes to the independent unit for police use of force. I think that's absolutely key. Within Arizona, politicians is a different problem. It's a wholly different problem to see anti-racism efforts in the Democratic Party. And I've been thrilled actually to hear the voices, particularly from our young Black activists, speaking out at both the county and the state level, asking politicians, and particularly those elected, to do better, to do better when they use dog whistles, to do better when they fail to represent the community, to do better when we need to be speaking out against systemic racism and aren't. I expect to be held accountable when elected in November, and I expect to hold those around me accountable as well. One of the other things that I would note, because we didn't get there this evening, is how little accountability is happening in this office right now, particularly when it comes to anti-racism efforts. Because the person in this office right now, when asked whether or not the criminal justice system exhibited signs of systemic racism, said that her prosecutors would never do that, should never do that, and would be disciplined if they did. And what that tells me is that that person doesn't understand what systemic racism is. Because we know that there are people who overtly make decisions based on race, but when that's not the biggest issue in our criminal justice system. The biggest issue is that the system is disproportionately treating Black and brown bodies in ways that it doesn't treat white ones. It's disproportionately charging people, and it is the system that we need to fix. And unless you're willing to deeply acknowledge that and see that as the problem it is, I don't think you can even begin to address it. One of the other things that has to happen in order to be held accountable is we need people of color in this office as leaders. And our current county attorney does not have a single person of color on her leadership team. That's disgusting. That will change day one.
Thank you, Julie.
Talk to us a little bit, if you are elected, kind of what that community engagement with groups like this and others looks like. I used to work at the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. The county attorney would come, brief the business people in the room about what's going on. Talk to us about kind of how you'll, apart from the community review boards, kind of how you'll stay in touch, how you'll know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm sick of that. I'm sick of seeing politicians, show up to chamber events, show up to donor events, and that's the only time you see them. So that's not how I run my campaign, and that's not how I'm going to run this office going forward. Back in the before times when we could actually have a cup of coffee or a cocktail face to face, what I did is every single Saturday made myself available, and we had community coffees. Anybody could show up, anybody could ask whatever was on their mind. And what I found was that was really powerful. In some instances, we'd have dozens of people show up who care about this office and really wanted to know what was happening. In my view, now that we're in COVID times, we've more or less done the same. It's being accessible to amazing organizations like the NAACP, being willing to field questions from the community, but also willing to do that in digital ways that haven't been done before. So you can count on the fact that we will continue the Facebook town halls. We will continue to openly and transparently field questions from the community, and even more important, to listen to what people are saying, and when changes need to be made and course corrections are to be had, to change and course correct with better evidence.
Thank you. So we have one last question here so I'm just going to be direct. Private prisons. Julie, what are your thoughts on private prison systems here in Arizona?
We need to end private prison systems here in Arizona.
Direct.
I mean,
direct.
Yeah, I mean, full stop. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how the county attorney plays into that decision, but the private prison industry has fundamentally corrupted criminal justice reform. It's one of the things that's been able to monetize the systemic racism that we see in this system, because people are making big money on the racial disparities that we've been talking about this evening. So when you monetize a system like prisons, there are always going to be winners in that system, and those winners tend to fund elections. Those elections tend to put people into office that will raise mandatory minimums, that will fight for truth in sentencing, things like that. So if we were to remove the profit incentive, we would be better off, not just on a moral standpoint, on an economic one as well. I would note that, so how we get there is your county attorney, if she is specifically decarceral and is committed to bringing down the number of folks who are currently incarcerated. And I have a truly bold commitment on my webpage. We can do this in a thoughtful way that keeps our community safe, saves us money, and is far more fair. But what that will do is that will start to starve the beast that is our private prison system. Right now, we have people who are elected who are chomping at the bit to build even more facilities, especially in light of what we've seen with the prison locks, of overcrowding at Perryville, et cetera. And if your county attorney was willing to commit to decarceration, which I am, we can prevent the proliferation of those private prisons. One more thing, because it's not just private prisons, and sometimes it's, I forget to mention this, it is also the private profit motives in our public prisons. So our public prisons rely on private healthcare. They rely on private telecom. They rely on private commissary. They, in several instances, and Hickman Eggs is a great scenario, they also rely on prison labor for private industry. And those are all systems that need to be broken down, because they are inappropriate uses of a profit generating center based on human misery and suffering, and that's not okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we're doing good on time. We're only like 1 minute over. Really appreciate and want to thank you for taking time to participate in tonight's event. It was my pleasure serving as the moderator. I'd love to give you 30 seconds to 1 minute for a closing statement, and then I'll leave it to Rocky.
Sure. Let me see if I can do it in even fewer than that. Listen, we've got 50 days until ballot drop. Those 50 days are amongst the most important days in the history of our entire nation. If you are at all inclined to get out there and to make a difference, whether it's my campaign or some other campaign, now is the time. We need to be communicating with voters about our shared values and about what's at stake on their ballot that will be arriving hopefully in the mail and very, very shortly. Gunnigle2020.com is the place to connect with me and my campaign, but please, over the next 50 days, make every single one of them count. Now is the time to change Arizona and to save our democracy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. So we appreciate everybody's time for coming here today, but we have one more special guest. Please welcome Torrey Masters. He is a spoken word and rap artist, a phenomenal MC. He has a piece today titled, "If Protectors Don't Protect Me, Is Protection Really Present?" So without further ado, Torrey Masters.
Thank you, Rocky. If protectors don't protect me, is protection really present? I look forward in different ways and they look at me and feel threatened. This is not to hurt you, but to stop you before you hurt me. And I throw my life away just because I tried to save me. This system is a trap that targets me because I'm black, and guns couldn't change it, so hands don't stand a chance. But with voting, there's a different power. There's a different way in. We are about to face a fierce opponent, and this is just a way-in. We're lacing gloves up and putting votes down first. We have to prove it to ourselves, but we've done this long enough to see we know now. Our vote counts, and we will vote. Thank you.
Yo, once again, that was Torrey Masters. That was, again, Torrey, one of my favorite MCs out here. One thing I really appreciated about that is it touched on key issues that were discussed during the panel discussion here today. So, but it's important that we do our part in getting out the vote. It's been a privilege to serve as your host for tonight. And just one more time here, just to kind of stress the importance of voting. We're in a very pivotal moment here as Americans, a very historic moment. So we implore you to utilize your political knowledge. But now it's time for me to turn over the program to Maricopa County Branch NAACP Second Vice President and Political Action Committee Chair, Dr. Camilla Westenberg. It's been a pleasure serving as your MC. Everybody, good night.
Thank you, Rocky Tirade, and thank you for being a most dynamic host for tonight's Facebook Live on public safety and criminal justice. I also extend a very special thank you to you, Julie Gunnigle, for sharing your platform as a candidate for Maricopa County Attorney. To Caitlin Harris Lang for facilitating the direction of our dialogue for the evening, and to Teray Masters for his on-point performance. I would like to thank the Maricopa County Branch NAACP Political Action Committee leads for the execution of this evening's event, Kanisha Jackson and Patrick Brown, as well as our branch president, Dr. Karen Harden, for her support of the concept. Most importantly, I thank each of you for joining us this evening. This has been an awesome event. Those of you who have joined us have some major decisions to make about the direction in which our city, state, and country is going to go. From the circle to the Cypher is a phrase coined several years ago to connect the past to the current, to the future, and where we are going. The circle is based on the African traditional formation of villagers gathering in their village and being summoned by drums to discuss pertinent community issues in their vernacular. The Cypher is based on hip-hop traditional formation, where rappers using their unique and creative vernacular gather to spit after having been summoned by a DJ to compete about pertinent issues in their community. From the circle to the Cypher is a conceptual concept or idea which has its purpose to bridge discussion among various ages about common issues which matter to all of us as it relates to being on the right side of humanity. Public safety and criminal justice is a very serious matter to me, and I know that it is to you as well. But what ultimately matters is what am I going to do about it, and what are you going to do about it? There are multiple avenues to deal with these concerns. I propose that given that we live in this quasi-democracy, that you consider that both the somewhat non-conventional and the conventional be taken. The non-conventional is when you march, you rally, you protest. We have a history of doing that. The conventional is when we vote. We have a history of doing that too. Your vote is your voice. All of our ancestors have paved the pathway so that we can have that voice. So let's ensure the outcome. Let's do both. Let's vote and march to the voting polls. Let's vote and rally to the voting polls. Let's vote and protest to the voting polls, literally. As an OG, I've personally been through some of our periods where we have been seeking equality. So I'm going to be symbolically and unapologetically me, coming from the circle of my time and speaking to you in the Cypher of your time. As former President Barack Obama said last night, at the Democratic National Convention. Do not let it be said that you were the missing ingredient. Seize the somewhat non-conventional and the conventional. Seize your time. Seize your right. Seize your privilege. And most importantly, seize your vote. October is a pivotal month during which time you have the last opportunity to get your voting business in order. We suggest that you register now for a mail-in ballot, an absentee ballot, even a pebble, which is a permanent early ballot that will come to you in the future repeatedly. Also, given what is happening with the corruption of the United States postal system by our national government, we recommend that you apply for your ballot now so that you will get it in time, and that you not put it in a US postal mailbox, that you take it to a drop-off site, a voting site, already completed, signed, dated, and drop it off in the dispenser. This way, you can minimize your social distancing concerns and probably won't even have to stand in a line. Now, there is a slide which is coming up, which provides you with some pertinent links that will give you the dates and the link for voting. And again, do that now. Register now so that you can get your ballot in time. It will give you information on where you can go to drop off your ballot. You can get information about the hours that a location is open. And you can even get information about how many people are, if there is a wait, especially in those who are actually filling out the ballot at the time. Check it out. It's amazing how much information you can get there. I recommend that you take your phones out now and take a picture of that slide so that you can have the information at your disposal. And I would dare say, if you have any questions, Google the Maricopa County Branch of the NAACP, and we will get back to you too to help you out with what you need to do. With all of this being said, I thank you for joining us. This is a very, very trying time. And we all need to pitch in because we are potentially going to lose our democracy during this election. Seize your vote. Do what you need to do. I thank you all for joining us. Now I am out. This is the final night of the Democratic National Convention. So I have to go check out whatever part I can, listen to the discussion at the end, put some knowledge in the dome, as you can always learn, and prepare myself to vote this year. Voters, thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.